Notes on History of India by Babasaheb Ambedkar. 2. Saka Period. According to Winston Smith, after first adopting AD 78, which appeared the most probable, finally chose 120 AD, and we may agree that this date marks the beginning of the Saka period inaugurated by Kanishka. The order in which the chief Kushan kings followed is doubtful. It is generally agreed that Kanishka came after Catphases 1, Kujulakara Catphases, and 2, Vima Catphases. Former of these two, a Bactrianized Scythian, must, in Dr. Smith's view, have assumed power about 40 AD. He seized Gandhara and the country of Takshila from the Gondophares, the Parthian prince who, according to the apocryphal Acts of the Apostles, received St. Thomas. His sons, Bhima, carved out a great empire for himself, embracing the Punjab and the whole western half of the Ganges basin. There seems to have been an interval of about 10 years between Catphases and Kanishka. The latter was the son of one Vajeshka and no relation of his predecessor. He seems to have been from Khotan, not Bactria, and indeed he spent the summer at Kapisi in Parupan, and the winter at Purushapara, which is Peshawar. The axis of his empire was no longer in the midst of the Greco-Iranian territory. The empire of Kanishka did not last long. Of his two sons, Vashishka and Havishka, only the second survived him. The power of the Kushans in the 3rd century was reduced to Bactria with Kabul and Gandhara, and they fell beneath the yoke of the Sassanids. Kshatrapas or Satraps. This title, which is Iranian, is borne by two dynasties founded by the Sakas, who had been driven from their country by the Yuezhi invasion. The first was established in Saurashtra, Kathiawar. One prince of this line, Chashtana, seems to have held Malwa before the great raids of the Kushans and to have become a vassal of the Kanishka. He ruled over Ujjaini, which was the center of the Indian civilization. The second line to which the name Shatharata is more particularly attached was the hereditary foe of the Andhras. It ruled over Maharashtra, the country between modern Surat and Bombay. It was this latter Saka state that was annihilated by the Satakarni, and it was the former which arranged it when Rudraban, the satrap of Ujjaini, conquered the Andhra king. The antagonism between the eastern and western states seems to have been accompanied by a difference of ideals. The Sakas, like all the Scythians of India or Serenidia, such as the Thorkans, retained from their foreign origin a sympathy for Buddhism, whereas the Andhras were keen supporters of Brahmanism. The Guptas. The events of the 3rd century are unknown to history, and we have very little information about the Kushan Empire. Daylight returns in 318 to 19 when there arises in the old country of Magadha a new dynasty, Gupta. The Guptas, Chandragupta too, conquered the country of Malwas, Gujarat, and Saurashtra, Kathiawar, overthrowing the first great satrap of the Saka dynasty of Ujjain. As an extension of his territory westward, he made Ayodhya and Kaushambi his capitals instead of Patliputra. About 155 BC, he conquered the whole of the lower Indus and Kathiawar, waged war in Rajputana and Audh, but took Mathura on the Jamuna and even reached Patliputra. He was severely defeated by Pushyamitra. Bactriana was, at least in the north, a barrier between Parthia and India. India was therefore less exposed to attack from Parthia. Nevertheless, there was at least one Parthian ruler, Mithridates, one who annexed the country of Takshila for a few years, about 138. End of the independence of Parthia and Bactria. The event that put an end to the independence of Parthia and Bactria was a new invasion resulting from a movement of tribes which has taken place far from India in the Mongolian steppes. About 170 BC, a horde of nomadic Scythians, the Yuezhi or Tokharians, being driven from Gobi, the present Kanshu, by the Hyang Hun or Huns, started on a wild migration which upset the whole balance of Asia. They fell on the Sakas, who were Iranianized Scythians dwelling north of the Persian Empire, and settled in their grazing grounds north of the Jazytes. The expelled Sakas fell on Parthia and Bactriana, obliterating the last vestiges of Greek rule between 140 and 120 BC, when the Tokharians, being defeated in their turns by the Wu Sun tribe, established themselves on the Oxus, and after that took all the country of the Sakas in eastern Iran at the entrance to India. That entrance was found in the 1st century after Christ. The conquest of India was the work of the Kushanas, a dynasty which united the Yuezhi tribes and established their dominion both over their own kinsfolk, the Sakas of Parthia, and over peoples of the Punjab. The accession of the principal king of this line, Kanishka, was placed at uncertain times between 57 BC and AD 200. Pushyamitra, a mayor of the palace, as Sebrinivilli called him, resurrected empire ruled by Antiochus III and lost two provinces, Parthia and Bactriana, which emancipated themselves simultaneously. The Parthians, whom the Indian called Pahlavs, were related to the nomads of the Turkoman steppes and occupied the country southeast of the Caspian. The Bactrians bordered on the Parthians on the northeast and were settled between the Hindu Kush and the Oxus. The number and wealth of their towns were legendary. These two peoples seem to have taken advantage of the difficulties of Antiochus and his successors, Seleucus II and III, in the west to break away. The Parthian Revolt was a natural movement led by Arsaces, the founder of a dynasty which was to rule Persia for nearly 500 years. The Bactrian Rising was brought about by the ambition of a Greek satrap. Theodotus represents an outbreak of Hellenism in the heart of Asia. There is no doubt that the formation of these enterprising nations on the Indo-Iranian border helped to shake the empire of Ashoka in the time of his successors. The Punjab, once a Persian satrapy and then a province of Alexander, was to find itself still more exposed to attack, now that smaller but turbulent states had arisen at its doors. After Theodotus I and II, the king of Bactria was Euthydemus, who went to war with Antiochus the Great of Syria. Peace was concluded with the recognition of Bactrian independence about 208. But during hostilities, Syrian troops had crossed the Hindu Kush and entered Kabul Valley, had severely despoiled the ruler Subhas Gena. Demetrius, the son of Antidomus, had increased his dominion not only in the present Afghanistan but in India proper, and bore the title the King of Indians. Between 190 and 180, there was a Greek adventurers reigning at Taxila named Palion and Agathocles. From 160 to 140 roughly, Kabul and the Punjab were held by a pure Greek, Milinda or Menander, who left a name in the history of Buddhism. The end.